is Jeanne Kitchens, Chief Technology Services Officer with Credential Engine. Thank you for watching Deeper Dive into Building Your Pathway. That is going to be the singular topic for this video, followed by additional resources. So this video builds off the Start Building Your Pathway video. If you haven't watched that one, I do recommend that you watch it before listening to this video, because we're going to begin with assuming that you've already know how to create your account, navigate to the Pathway Builder, and have a good grasp of the Pathway board, the components of the Pathway board, and an understanding of how to drag and drop resources. So we're going to start with a pathway progression. On the Pathway Builder interface, you'll see the points in the progression at the top of the board. If you did not include a progression model, you will always see pathway displayed, and to the right of that column, you will always see destination component. If a progression model was included, you'll see whatever levels you included with your progression model at the top of the board, just under the header. In this particular example, I used a progression model with levels of entry level, supervisor, and management. And you can see to the right of that progression, those progression levels, it will say destination component. So your destination component will always be at the far right, and it's always a requirement to have one pathway component occupy that space on the board under destination component. The selected resources and components always appear in your left rail. And remember, the selected resources are resources published to the Credential Registry. So you're searching the Credential Registry, you're bringing those resource cards in. Those cards will look a lot like the empty component cards, but they're filled out. So you can see on the left here, where we have selected components such as a course, it's pre-populated with the information about that course. Same with assessment and so forth. This is all information that came directly from the registry, so it is pre-filled in. And with your components, those are empty containers, so they need to be filled in, and they'll always have a question mark that you can click to find out what the definition of that specific component is. So that's the difference between those two types of cards. If you need to return to search the registry to bring more cards in, you can always do that. The whole idea is you'll be dragging and dropping cards from this left rail onto the board. And when data is not in the registry, but you need to have a component, you will come under components, you'll grab an empty card and fill it in. And I also want to note here under components, this last card, this orange card, the condition card is always here. You currently cannot search the registry for conditions. It is something that we are looking at implementing, but you will have to create conditions because they're really unique to every pathway. So you will come here to components. If you want to use conditions, they're optional. You will grab them here, and you'll always recognize them as this orange card. You will always start with your destination card, and your destination card could be a resource that you got from the registry, but it doesn't have to be. In this particular case, for this example, I grabbed a component that was empty from the component library, and I dragged that to the board and I filled it in, and I made that my destination component. So what that means is for this pathway, all of the components of the pathway will be aimed at, successfully achieving this job. In this example is a certified nursing assistant. Grid lines. If it is helpful to you to kind of see the board as it is arranged as a grid, under settings, you just click settings and you can select grid on. And if you don't want to see it, then click it again and it will turn the grid off. Personally, I do find it helpful sometimes, especially if you have a larger pathway, and because you will be placing your cards within these rectangles. So you won't be able to place a card, for example, at a crosshairs between the corners of 4 rectangles. You will always be placing your cards in the middle of a rectangle. So it could be helpful for you to turn the grid on. So you're dragging and dropping cards from the left rail, you're dragging your resources with the data that's linked to the registry, you're dragging your empty components. The components that are empty are outlined in red. It means you need to click the 3 circles and open up the edit modal on the right rail and fill your card in minimally with the required data. But the first thing you want to do is just start kind of laying out your board and dragging and dropping. You started with your destination. Now you're going to start thinking through your progression, dragging and dropping cards, maybe moving them around a little bit and experimenting a little bit until you get a layout that you like. And you can see here that in this particular example, I have a progression model. So it's showing levels at the top. It's showing over here, I see a supervisor level, and I see the highest level is management. And that is a level where I'm achieving my destination component, my job in this case. So I'm laying out my cards to show a sequence of progression directly affiliated with those levels. So for example, under management, this job, this course, this competency, and this credential are all directly aligned with and are part of the management level. And you'll see it even automatically shows it on the card. I still have to fill these cards in, they're outlined in red. So I have to name my job and describe my job minimally. But as I drop cards in progression levels, it's automatically going to identify the association of that card with that level. So if we come over here under supervisor, I can see that the cards that I dragged and dropped under supervisor, I still need to fill them in because they're outlined in red. So I will double click those little dots there and I will fill in my card, but it's automatically going to line those cards to the level of supervisor. All along the way, be sure and save your work. The board will automatically save every 5 minutes. However, we recommend that you save along the way. So filling in your empty components, I was just talking about that. Those red outlines for empty components mean I need to fill them in. And as I talked about in the intro to starting to build your pathway, the edit modal will show what is required with a red asterisk. So if it's required, you have to fill it in. If there's not a red asterisk, you don't have to fill it in, but we will always recommend that you fill in as much information as possible to provide as much context for yourself, your team, and for users of this information to know what each component is intended for. So going to make sure you fill in all your empty components. And of course, when you're done, you're going to click Save Component. If for some reason you change your mind, you can just hit Cancel. Now, there's 3 types of empty components that you can fill in credential registry data on the fly. So one of those is a credential component. So I have a credential component example here. And at the very top of that empty component, there's a little toggle here. You can see this toggle, and I've turned it on to create a registry resource. So you're only going to do this when the data is not already published to the registry, but you want to have that rich data connection because remember, the cards are really a proxy for the data in the registry, and the data in the registry is a much richer linked set of data. So you're going to want to link your component whenever possible to data in the registry. And just as with the component cards, when you see a red asterisk, it means it's required. And you're going to see that the minimum data requirements for the registry are more than what is required for the regular component cards. So you have to fill in everything that is red that is required, and that meets our minimum data policy. So you'll have to add all the minimum data here and then save it. And when you save it, when you click here, it's going to automatically publish that to the registry. So you don't have to wait for Credential Engine to approve it. You created that data in the registry on the fly, and it published it to the Credential registry. So now if you want to go back and add more data to this registry resource, you can do that through the publishing system. That information is now in the publishing system, and you can add more data to it if you'd like. But here you're going to add the minimum required data. So we're filling out our cards after we've dragged and dropped them. In that particular case, we created a new resource, and now we're going to connect our cards, and we're going to do that by always clicking left to right. Our arrows are going to our destination. Our destination is always on the far right side of the board. We really shouldn't have arrows going to the left. So if you did put in arrows that somehow were going to the left, when you went to approve your pathway, you would likely get a list of conflicts that need to be resolved to correct your arrows. So here, what I did was I clicked on the orange dot on the card to the left, or the parent card, then I clicked on the orange dot on the card in the right, and my arrow appears. So for this course that's below this course 2, I clicked on the orange dot, and then I clicked on the assessment orange dot, and it created a nice connection here to show that both of these cards are connected, but those are 2 separate connections, and on. So you'll just want to go through and make all of your connections by clicking on your orange dots. Now, if you decide you want to rearrange things and you want to begin removing a connector or 2 or all of them, you can. To remove connectors, you're going to select the icon on the connector. And once you select the icon on the connector, it will provide a list of all of the connections. In this particular case, this card has 1 connection going from the credential to the job. I opened it up and it's literally showing that I have 1 connection, and I can click to remove that connection. So I just click the X here and the arrow will disappear, or the connector will disappear. So I can continue to build on my board, and optionally, if I want, I could add conditions. I don't have to. The first level of expression is to just connect your cards with arrows, but conditions add important information, so you may want to add conditions. So your conditions are always going to be in your component library. They're the very last card. It's orange. You're going to drag and drop your condition to the right of the cards that require a condition. So a condition is always going to follow cards, and you can have multiple conditions on a board, but they're always going to relate to a discrete set of cards. In this particular example, the condition that I have here is linked to from a job, a course, and a competency. And my condition is that we have to complete job performance requirements, leadership development course, and demonstrate leadership competency. So you have to complete all 3 of these components as a condition to progress through your pathway. Now, optionally, we can expand on our conditions even further, and we can add constraints. Again, this is optional. You do not have to do it, but if you want to include that additional expression to convey those requirements in your pathway, you can do so. And this example here, the constraints are always at the bottom of the condition card. So they're directly related to a condition. They're just optional from the condition card. So you can have a condition without constraints, but you can't have constraints without a condition. So if you want to add conditions, you can think of them grammatically as a sentence. So here are some examples of constraints on the condition that I just talked about. And those constraints are that you have to have job experience or management job experience that must be greater than or equal to 6 months. For the course, you have to have a grade of that's greater than or equal to C, and that you had to have a leadership competency evaluation that is greater than or equal to acceptable. So you can add those kinds of constraints onto your card, and there is a separate video to learn more about constraints. So if you're interested in that, I would encourage you to watch that video as well. As you're building your board, it may be helpful to highlight connections. And if you want to highlight connections, they're going to show in this nice blue color here as an outline around cards, and the connectors will also display as the blue color. And to show connectors, what you can do is just double click on any card. So if you double click on any card, then it will display the connectors that are directly adjacent to that card. So you'll notice over here, these are not highlighted. If I were to double click over here on the required one, then it would highlight in blue. It would unhighlight this over here, and it would highlight in blue the connections to the left of this condition, and it would highlight the arrow and the credential over here to the right. So that's sometimes useful, especially if you have a larger pathway and you want to get clarity on what the connections are looking like. Conflicts. As you're building your pathway, you can save it at any time and you can return to it. You don't have to build it completely in one sitting. However, when you are ready to approve it because you believe you're done, and if you have any conflicts, meaning that don't allow it to be published, then those are going to display there. And there is a separate video that gets into conflicts as well that I would encourage you to watch to get into those kinds of details. But every error that shows is going to have to be fixed. In this particular case, you can see that I hit approve on my board, but I have a bunch of red lines around pathway components. That means I didn't fill them in yet, and it is a requirement. You have to fill them all in. You can't have empty components on the board. If I accidentally brought one in, I would need to delete it. And also it's missing connectors. You can't just connect, in this case, the middle of the pathway. There needs to be arrows connecting these cards all the way to the destination. So it's meant to be helpful to help adjust and fix any issues before you can actually approve something to be published. And then once you have fixed your conflicts and you click approve, it will show that there are 0 conflicts, and it will ask you, are you sure you want to approve your pathway? And of course you will say yes. Once you have published your pathway, you'll be able to view it in the credential finder. Now, there's some other errors I need to tell you about as well that do not show as conflicts, and this is a listing of them. If you see error messages after approving your pathway, and these will not show as conflicts, they'll just show as errors, as red messages on the board that will tell you what to fix. So these are the 3 things that cause errors. Missing connections, that means the arrows. So to get rid of a card that tells you that, that there's a connection missing, you need to add the arrow. Resources in the left rail. When you finish your pathway, the left rail should be empty. There should not be any selected resources. And remember, the selected resources are the resources that you brought in from the Credential Registry. There's always a library of components, but those are empty, so those can stay there. But you cannot have any resources left in the left rail. And this message here tells you to, there are still pending components in the left panel. So remove that and then you can approve it. And resources that need to be published. So if you try to approve a pathway and you have resources that have not been published yet, that are supposed to be linked from the cards, then it will let you know that, and you'll need to go publish that resource, and then you can approve your pathway. And that concludes our video. There are numerous additional resources available to you from the Credential Engine website, and of course from the Pathway Builder help icon in the header. Thank you for watching.